on ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. It's not very often you actually find an excuse to be able to play Adam and the Ants and stand and deliver, but I think I just got away with it. Are you fascinated by bushrangers? Do you ever try and imagine why anyone would make the choice of becoming a bushranger and what life might have been like for them after that? Well, for the past couple of weeks, my guest on a Tuesday has been bushranger expert Aidan Phelan. Aidan is the author of Glenrowan, and he also runs the website A Guide to Australian Bushranging. Tonight, needless to say, is no exception. And I'm sure if you have a question relating to Tassie bushrangers, Aidan would be only too happy to help, or at the very least point you in the right direction. 1300 222 936 is the number, or you can send a text if you like on 0438 922 936. Maybe you visited a bushranger's hideout, or you were curious about the truth of a bushranger story you might have heard from your primary school days. Whatever the case may be, feel free to get in touch. Good evening, Aidan.
Hello, how are you?
I am very, very well, and very much looking forward to finding out a bit about Rocky Whelan, which wasn't a name that certainly as a young person in Tasmania was ever taught about at school.
Yeah, he's a bit of a mystery for a lot of people because they may have heard the name, but they don't really know anything about who he was or what he did.
What do we know about him before he became a bushranger?
Well, and when he got to Australia, he spent a lot of time breaking rocks and getting flogged. Eventually, he managed to get his way out, and he was at large sort of around the Richmond area of Tasmania. Another chap with him for a little while, and then they were committing highway robberies. But they had a bit of a disagreement about the way that they executed their business, and Rocky decided to go his own way.
Do we know how old he was or what he may have looked like?
Now, from memory, because I'm a little bit new to Rocky Whelan myself, to be perfectly honest, he was quite old by bushranger standards. He was in his late 30s, and he was called Rocky because he had a very craggy appearance, lots of lines and wrinkles and pockmarks. And he was also a very tall gentleman for the time, so he was quite imposing.
Belinda has texted through on 0438 922 936, and she says, hello, Paul and Aidan. Is it true Rocky Whelan had a hideout on the mountain?
On Mount Wellington, yeah. He actually used that as a base of operations just after he separated from his mate, and that was where he committed the majority of his crimes, which were quite unpleasant.
Now, when you say quite unpleasant, how unpleasant are we talking about, Aidan?
Well, some people have suggested that Rocky Whelan was one of Australia's first serial killers. So his modus operandi was he would bail people up as they were travelling around the Mount Wellington area, and he'd rob them, but he wouldn't spare their lives. And one of the things that got him caught out in the end was that he went into a bootmaker shop wearing some customised boots that he'd taken from one of his victims.
Goodness. How likely do you think that those stories are to be true?
I think they're reasonably accurate because Whelan himself admitted to them while he was awaiting his execution. He actually wrote a letter in the condemned cell admitting that he'd committed at least 7 killings, and it was rumoured that he may have committed many more.
And what period was this? Are we talking 1830s, 1840s?
No, it's actually quite late for the Tasmanian bushrangers. He was hanged in 1855.
Okay. Do we know much about, I suppose, how he was perceived by the Tasmanian public?
There's not a lot that I've been able to find that's very positive about him. Let's put it that way. He was considered to be quite a rogue, even by bushranger standards. He was known to Martin Cash when they were both on Norfolk Island, and Cash had a very low opinion of Whelan.
And the cave itself that Belinda sent a text through about, was inquiring about, is that somewhere, a place that people are able to go today? Is it easy to locate?
I haven't been there myself since finding out about Rocky Whelan, and that's mainly because I'm up here in Victoria where we've not been able to move around much. But I believe that there are walking tracks which can get you there.
And certainly, if anyone listening has been there or would like to describe it for me, I'd love to hear. The number you can call is 1300 222 936. The text you might even have a photo on your phone. I'd love to see it. 0438 922 936 is the text. It's 8:15. My name's Paul McIntyre, and my guest is author and bushranger expert Aidan Phelan, who is the author of Glen Rowan and also runs a website called A Guide to Australian Bushranging. Aidan, you mentioned Martin Cash, and I suspect there's very much a much longer conversation that can be had about Martin Cash. But a pretty extraordinary chap, an extraordinary story.
Definitely. I was brushing up a bit on Martin recently, and even just before tonight, I thought I needed to refresh myself because a lot to take in. He had quite an extraordinary life, and he was one of the few bushrangers who actually managed to record his memoirs before he shuffled off the mortal coil. And for that reason, if nothing else, it's a very interesting and unique case in the annals of bushranging history.
Yes, the fact that he lived out his life and was able to come back into society after having been a very famous bushranger.
That's right, and he wasn't the only one who managed to live to a ripe old age, but the fact that he was something of a celebrity while he was a bushranger, and then quite a well-known figure around Hobart and Glenorchy and a few other places when he got back to civilization, as it were. That really helped to build up a lot of his reputation. And of course, those memoirs are an absolutely invaluable document to understand who he was and how he was as a bushranger and as a settler as well.
And a text, Aidan, has come through on, excuse me, on 0438 922 936, and it says Rocky Whelan's cave. Yes, it is a reasonably short walk up from O'Grady's Falls or down from the Springs. And Claire says on her text that it is indeed signposts. Thank you very much for that, Claire. Great to hear from you. Aidan, just getting back to Martin Cash, what do we know about him prior to his bushranging days?
We actually know quite a lot, and again, that's mostly thanks to his memoirs, which he records a lot of information about his early days. So he was raised in Ireland, in Wexford, and by his own account, his childhood was kind of, shall we say, awry. He didn't tend to follow the rules very often, and he considered himself to have been something of a spoiled brat. But depending on which source you necessarily believe, he was either transported to Australia for attempting to kill a love rival, that was his version of events, or he was sent because he was found guilty of burglary. But he came out as a teenager. He managed to work his way to a ticket of leave up in New South Wales, and then he got himself involved in stock theft, and he managed to escape to Van Diemen's Land with his common-law wife, Eliza, who was actually the wife of another man. So he was stealing cattle and stealing hearts.
Goodness.
But, yeah. So they moved around a lot, and they ended up in Campbelltown before the law finally caught up with him.
And when the law did catch up with him, what happened?
There was a lot of arrests and a lot of escapes and a lot of fights. At various times he would be arrested and be put in irons, and he was sent out to Jerusalem, which is now known as Colebrook, and he managed to escape from there by climbing over the wall of the prison and hiding in the bush, and then he walked all the way back up to Campbelltown. And he was only there a little while before he was spotted again, and he had a bit of a conflict with a local, and ended up arrested once more after a lot more travelling. So he was kind of in and out of jail a lot in an effort to try and stay one step ahead of the authorities.
And once he was captured, and I believe there was a bit of a chase around the streets of Hobart Town as it was then, but once he was captured, how unusual was it that he wasn't immediately sentenced to death?
It was extremely unusual because he actually had been sentenced to death, but at the very last minute it had been commuted and he was sent to Norfolk Island instead. So this period of bushranging that he actually engaged in was only about a year with Cash and Company. And his colleagues, Lawrence Kavanagh, he was sent to Norfolk Island with Cash. George Jones had been sentenced to death. He was hanged. And while they were over in Norfolk Island, Lawrence Kavanagh got involved in a mutiny with another bushranger named William Westwood. And he was one of 12 men who were executed there. So the fact that Cash was the only one of the trio to actually escape the noose in more ways than one is quite remarkable.
I'm almost tempted to suggest that he, in part at least, led something of a charmed life.
I think even he would agree with that.
A text has come through to say Rocky Whelan's cave is very easy to find, Paul. It's just off the Redford track, complete with signposts. Thank you very much for that text. If you'd like to send a text, maybe with a question for my guest at the moment, Aidan Phelan, who is an author and a expert on all things bushranging, you can do so on 0438 922 936 is the text, or you can call if you want 1300 222 936. And curiously, Aidan, just getting back to Martin Cash, he comes back to Tasmania.
He does. He actually got married to another convict woman, and they settled down for a little while, and they had a son who was inventively named Martin. And for a while, he actually moved over to New Zealand, and he got into some, shall we say, shady business over there before coming back. He obviously decided that he wanted to come back to his family and start fresh. And so, yeah, he settled up in Glenorchy, and unfortunately, things didn't go too well for him. His son died of illness at the age of 17. And Martin descended into alcoholism after that. There's a lot of news reports and things that sort of describe the level of intoxication that Martin was prone to when he was out on the streets. And it wasn't uncommon to find him passed out in a bush somewhere on the side of the road after having been at the pub.
And I know he certainly spent a little while, I believe, working at the Botanical Gardens as well in Hobart.
Yeah, he was in charge of all the gardening over there for a while, and that was before he went to New Zealand. So he did try to go straight for a while. It's a sad ending, really, because he had that wildness in him that got him into so much trouble. But then he did try to make amends somehow in the last years of his life.
And Aidan, a name that I don't know much about, I have to say, is Daniel Priest, who was known as the Friendly Bushranger. What was his story?
Now, Daniel Priest is someone that I found really rather recently and was quite fascinated that he wasn't talked about more. So he was active around the same time that Martin Cash was bushranging. So his bushranging days were basically from about 1842 to 1845. And he had been transported in 1836 for sheep stealing, and he was sort of in and out of assignments and things before he decided to chuck it all in and go bush. And he actually operated mostly around the Western Tiers. So he was in a very, very rough and rugged kind of place, but he managed to survive. And really the only things that he was stealing were clothes and supplies to keep him going while he was up there in the rocks. And the reason he was known as the Friendly Bushranger is because anyone that he robbed, he treated them with the utmost courtesy, despite the fact that he was robbing them. And a lot of the people who had been his victims actually were more or less on his side at the end of it.
And what was Daniel Priest's fate?
So that's something I'm delving into myself. I've got a book that I've been sort of peeling apart called Compelled to Tears, which is by someone named Chris Loring, who I believe is the descendant of Daniel Priest, and that should give you an indication of how he ended up. So his bushranging career came to an end after he'd accidentally shot himself in the foot with his shotgun climbing over some rocks, and he basically went to get some supplies from a hut, and the hut was full of soldiers, and he turned himself in. He went to trial, and he said that he wasn't going to deny any of the charges. He gets sent to jail. He was on Norfolk Island for a bit, and he did his time, and he got out and started a family.
And how was he viewed when he went to trial? Was there a lot of sympathy for him, given his nickname?
Surprisingly, there was, and it was quite unusual to see someone who was so affable in the dock that he was almost genteel in the way that he addressed people. He said he didn't want to provide any defence. He didn't want to have any kind of legal representation or anything. He just said, if these people say anything that I think is false, I'll mention it, but otherwise I'll just sit here and be quiet. And on one occasion, one of the witnesses pointed out that the clothes that he was wearing were clothes that he had stolen from him. And Priest said, well, right you are. And so at the end of that session, the clothes were returned.
Fair cop, Gov.
Mm. Yeah, he's an odd one.
Were there many other, I suppose, notorious or notable bushrangers who were, holding people up at this stage of the colony?
There actually was quite a number, and it's been one of the fun things that I've been working on, trying to figure out exactly how many were going around in Tasmania at the time. And it's funny that it's something that not a lot of researchers have actually looked into, because it's absolutely fascinating seeing that you've got not only your Martin Cashes and your Matthew Brady's and things like that, but you also have, obviously, there was Daniel Priest, and decades before him there was a guy called William Priest, who originally was getting mixed up with him, but he had his own little story to go by. He had a gang which was run by a man named James Atterall. That was in the late 1830s. They operated mostly around sort of the Midlands area, and their most infamous incident was at the, I keep going to call it the Bull's Head. It's the Bald-Faced Stag Inn. That's what it was called.
What a name.
Yeah, and so basically they went in and they bailed the place up, and one of the prisoners was getting a bit lippy, so he was shot. And so the gang went on the run, and it took a while to bring them all in, but the ones that weren't shot were hanged, which a lot of people were very thankful for. But that was kind of the flavour of bushranging at the time. It was sort of erratic, and you had these little gangs that would pop up. Most of them were escaped convicts or people who had gotten their ticket of leave and then fallen foul of the law again. But yeah, there was actually at one point it was estimated there were probably hundreds roaming around Van Diemen's Land at any time.
Wow. I can't help but think, Aidan Phelan, the more we talk about these characters and what was going on in the early days of European settlement here in Tasmania, I do wonder why there isn't a museum especially devoted to Tasmanian bushrangers, because it certainly sounds as though you wouldn't be spoilt for choice in terms of the amount of people that took up bushranging.
Absolutely. It's as I say, it's quite a pity that not more people have taken the effort to actually do the research and find out some of these stories, because when you compare them to the more well-known ones like Ned Kelly and Ben Hall and Frank Gardner and Thunderbolt, they're all very exciting, but the Tasmanian stories have that little extra something that I think comes from being from the island state. It's that adaptability to a really rugged and quite variable terrain. It's the fact that they were able to adjust to such a almost, I suppose you could say it was a brutal society back then. in a way that it doesn't seem to have been reflected in the way that bushranging occurred on the mainland.
Aidan Phelan, author of Glenrowan. I very much hope that we can continue these conversations and maybe talk about, further or some more perhaps obscure bushrangers from Tasmania's past, if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I look forward to it. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. You're listening to ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. It's 8:30.